Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this CCB Connect and Share Cybertips webinar. My name is Clara Grillet, and I am an analyst at the Center for Cybersecurity Belgium. This is a really exciting time, and not just because we had really funky music in the background, but it is exciting because we are officially in our second year of running Cybertips, and the entire team is thrilled to bring out more webinars throughout the year. You know that just by now. If you have any suggestions for topics, just please share them with us in the chat or in the survey that will pop on your screen at the end of today. So based on public interest, we could, shift a couple of things around to really focus on your concerns. And to start us off with this new year, with the team, we decided to talk about a tool that we love. It is called MISP, and it is used to collect, to store, analyze, but also share indicators of compromise in an easy and a fast way. MISP has been a staple in the CTI world for a couple of years now, and is also used across the globe. And so to shed some light on what we believe is an amazing tool, I have the pleasure to welcome one of the main developers for the MISP project, the acclaimed Andras Iklody. Andras is a software developer at CIRCL, which is the Computer Incident Response Center in Luxembourg, and he has been a core lead developer for MISP for 13 years. So there simply is no better MISP expert outside of Andras. So welcome, Andras.
Good morning.
All right, thank you. I'm happy to hear that we can actually hear you back. Andras, thank you so much for coming today. I feel like I am in the presence of a MISP legend. And so for those of you who are not as in awe as I am, and maybe who just signed up because they had a little bit of time for today's webinar, maybe Andras, you could explain what is MISP and what is it actually used for?
So basically, to explain what the tool is, it is an open source threat intelligence sharing platform. So it is basically a threat intelligence platform with a very strong focus on the sharing and the community aspect. So basically what that means is it is a tool that allows you to take in information from all sorts of different sources. So anything about related to cyber threats and other types of threats from your internal processes. So that means if you had an incident, if you're doing research internally and all of these sources, as well as your partners. So that means communities that you're part of, or for example, in this case from CCB directly, as well as OSINT information and your usual feed providers. So it takes all of this information, it then harmonizes it into a uniform format, and it allows us to correlate that information, easily convert it to other formats to feed your various protective tools, and to also monitor trends and threats. Besides that, it allows you to basically collaborate on the data. That means that you can give feedback to other parties in the community. Basically, everyone is a consumer and a producer of information, or can be. You can add improvements, you can share your own perspectives, your own detections, and extend it with your own research, thereby making the information that the community basically feeds on to for their protective needs better and better over time. And then in the end, this information lands in your IDSs, your firewalls, and your SIEMs, whatever you have hooked up to MISP.
All right, so what you're saying is MISP has different kinds of uses. It's threat information. You can use it for getting alerts by feeding into your own defense systems, but also for research, and also I'm guessing for threat hunting as well. So based on what you just explained, I'm just wondering if it's correct to say that organizations should be on MISP because it's a really easy way to improve your internal detection capabilities for free, since everything around MISP is free. Is this an accurate point of view? Is it something that's a little bit limited? Are there other uses beyond that?
No, that's one of the main uses. Obviously, is for you to be able to ingest information and being a free source of information for most communities out there. It's also a great way to get started on building your own protection. So that means that it will end up driving a lot of your internal processes in the end. So that means anything from detection, protection, and also threat hunting, as you mentioned.
When we were preparing for today's webinar, you did mention that what you really loved about MISP is the community aspect and how it brings on information from around the world. So it might be a little bit less US centric than other commercial feeds. Can you maybe explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, this is one of the tricky things, and traditionally, we as CSIRTs and the other organizations that we know, SOCs and so on, they were mostly relying on feeds they were purchasing from vendors, and most of these vendors are very focused on their customer base, and that's where they get most of their information and IOCs from. So generally, these end up very often being US-centric, as you mentioned, and that means that it's less relevant, perhaps, to you than some of the threats that your partners are facing. So this came from a use case for us as well. We basically wanted to be able to collaborate with those that are seeing similar threats as us, and MISP is a great vehicle for that.
Do you actually have any idea how big the MISP community is? How is it spread out across the globe?
Yeah, this is a little bit tricky. So being an open source project, we generally don't know who the users of MISP are unless they let us know or unless they don't join our community. So the only thing I can speak about is really the communities that we as CIRCL run. So we run, for example, a private sector community with around 5,000 organizations, and we pretty much have a full global coverage with the various organizations we have on board.
Okay. So that's, and how many contributors do you have, or how many, how do you have any idea of how many organizations are sort of plugged in, at least for those of which you have a view?
Yeah, so in our case, the total for CIRCL is around, with all our communities, it's around 7,000, but overall globally, that's only just a small part of the picture. So it is very widespread, and we also know of massive communities in South America, for example, in Asia, North America, and so on. So it's pretty large and growing community.
It's already pretty impressive, 67,000 right now. So of course, you might have guessed, the CCB is a contributor. What we do is that we tend to share events. On average, we have multiple events per day. Um, to give you an idea of what the contributor would do, we would share events that are based on OSINT reports, but also we have verified data that comes from trusted partners from our global network of security authorities. But we also use IOCs from incidents in Belgium and share that information. Of course, incident information is anonymized, and that sort of can be the kind of information that really would be interesting because it comes from things that we have seen. Going back, Andras, to the idea of getting IOCs for free, how does that work in practice? How do you get the information if you're a newly arrived person onto MISP?
I mean, the first step is to get your own MISP up and running. So that's the first step. That means that you basically spin up a MISP instance. All you need is either a bare bones server or a Docker container for it to get started. So it's pretty straightforward. And then you start connecting to other communities. So this is where the entire community aspect comes in. You basically request access or you negotiate access with partners. If you're part of a sectorial group, you ask your sectorial group if they already have a community. In Belgium, it's rather straightforward because you already have CCB running a massive community, so you already have a first point of contact where you can get started. Once you're connected, basically you exchange what we call synchronization accounts. So this is basically an API key to the other community. And then the MISPs start talking to each other. So you can basically configure rules on what data you want to share and what data you want to receive from the other party. Everyone's in control of their own data, so you can limit what can be seen. So for example, in our case, we keep a lot of data internal that is incident related, and then the technical information we share out to the wider community. But it is very straightforward, especially when it starts out with ingesting information. In this case, you would, for example, connect to CCB's instance, and you would basically tell your MISP to start pulling in all the data of the past year, for example. And that's basically it.
All right. One thing that I'm just wondering is if I'm really starting with a new tool, sometimes I'm trying to think about what are kinds of mistakes I want to avoid. So you can set up your own MISP instance, which I understand. The only thing I'm thinking of is how do I know what I need to do? Do I need to do a little bit of thinking before I set it up to realize how am I going to be using it? Do you have any indications about that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, one of the most challenging parts of getting started is figuring out what you actually need, what sort of tools you want to feed, what sort of use cases do you have, what are your intelligence requirements in your organization. So once you have these figured out, you can basically use labels on and data channels within MISP to decide which of those informations you pull in and where you pipe it internally in your own tooling. So that means that you will probably have multiple use cases. So you will probably have a use case for detection, a use case for log analysis, a use case for firewalling. And these probably will have different requirements in terms of what data you're interested in. So once you come up with an idea of what is interesting for you and how you want to feed your tools, then you basically put that in practice through MISP. This is something that is going to be refined over time. So there are obviously some pitfalls early on that you can run into, but this is a growing pain for any new SOC or any new security team, basically.
That makes sense. Of course, once again, a practical question there. How do you actually integrate MISP with your defense tools? Because I'm just picturing, I'm just starting plugging into to MISP. I have a lot of information because I connected it with a bunch of communities. There's a lot of noise potentially. So how do I try to filter through that?
Yeah, noise is one of the trickiest things to deal with. We have some tools built into MISP. So we have a system called the warning list system that allows you to at least reduce all those typical noise data points that you get in feeds, as well as in sharing between partners. That means anything that is legitimate information that somehow ended up in the report. A good example for that, for example, quite a while ago when there was the hack of the Democratic Party in the US, there was basically a large report that was explaining what the IOCs were. And a lot of them ended up being Tor exit notes, for example. These are not directly indicators, but when you're doing the incident response, it is hard to differentiate. You just see an action coming from an IP. Unless you basically look into it, you don't know what it is. Warning lists are a very good system for that because it allows you to immediately flag anything that is a known quantity in the IOCs and filter those out from going to your various different tools. In terms of hooking this up, it's very straightforward. So basically, we have an API. Most of the tools out there nowadays either have a connector to MISP. That means that you just need to configure it and give it the credentials to your MISP instance and configure rules of what you want to pull in. Or in other cases, you might have to do some custom plumbing, but it's a massive community out there unless it is really bespoke tools that you've built yourself. You don't really have to worry about there being connectivity between the tool and MISP itself. But if you run into anything exotic, let us know. We're interested in that too.
Okay. So what I'm understanding from you is basically there's a little bit of tweaking involved as you get started, and it just becomes easier over time as you get more and more familiar with the tool. What would be your recommended steps, though, that you want to take as you start out?
I mean, the first thing I would do is figure out what communities I should be part of. So that is the absolute most important thing, is to figure out where I can get information from. And start negotiating with all of those parties. So, for example, CCB has their own process on how to get onboarded. We at CIRCL have our process. There are ISACs, there are sectorial groups that all have their own processes. So get started with that ASAP. And then the other thing to do as next step is, for encoding your own information, figure out how you want to encode information and what you want to include in all of your reports that you're encoding in MISP. So this is where a lot of magic can happen, and time investment really pays off in the long term.
Actually, I'm kind of interested in that. Just for everybody's understanding, so we have a bunch of resources put online on the slide because, as Andras said, there's many different communities, many people do it slightly differently, so it's good to have a good understanding of how MISP works. Things are a little bit clear there. But Andras said something that I find really interesting, and you say that when you want to share information, so MISP is not just receiving information, it's also being able to share that. How would you go about sharing IOCs? What's the thought process that you want to go for in order to create an event?
Right. So, I mean, first of all, this is also like an organic growth process for every organization. Everyone will start out basically not sharing and ingesting data, and that's perfectly fine. Once you get more comfortable with the tool and you're thinking of starting to share, you can start really small. You can start sharing feedback on data coming in from others, share citing information that you've also seen something that was shared. And then once you're past that phase, you can start actually sharing your own events. So this is what we call our basic envelope for data that we share in MISP. That means it could be the technical outcomes of an incident, of something you detected in your honeypots. So a lot of different things, or simply just research, something you read in an OSINT report and you want to share with the community. Then it starts the actual process of encoding the information. And this is where a lot of things can either go right or wrong, depending on how much effort you put in there. There is the possibility to basically share very quickly, just quickly let MISP automatically parse out indicators from a report, for example, and just share those with the community. And then you get one of those lists of traditional indicators that you would get in a lot of feeds. Or you can go further and start building something more complex and really tell a story with the data you're sharing. We highly encourage you to take the time to do this. It really helps also the recipients of the information. That means if you can basically build a graph of what happened during the execution of an attack, clearly label what sort of tools were used, what was abused, how you managed to detect it. You can even share additional supporting materials along with the data so that you can help other organizations. For example, if you have a Python script to detect some of the IOCs, or if you have a Yara rule, sharing those along with the event really goes a long way.
That makes a lot of sense. Actually, that's also why we were like reports, especially if they have detection rules, because that's something you can really easily fire up inside your own systems. What I do like, as somebody who is not always doing everything exactly by the book, is that what I think what you're saying is we don't need to get too hung up on making the perfect event at first. We don't need to be sloppy, but there is no expectation of perfection. Feedback is there from others to tell us, hey, maybe you could have done it a slightly different way, but it's not negative. Um, Anders, this entire series is called the Cybertips for a reason. So you know where I'm going with this. Do you have tips for MISP and not just the tongue twister, but things that we need to avoid in terms of common pitfalls or errors that you see all too often? Because I'm guessing that you see a lot of events.
Yeah, a bunch of things, and you touched on one of the most important ones, which is don't wait for the perfect report. So don't get caught up on processes and on trying to get everything perfect. Start sharing earlier. As a fun little story, this is basically how MISP started. We were a bunch of national certs and military certs that were collaborating. And we were all having regular meetings where we discussed the ongoing incidents. This was happening once every 2 months, if I remember correctly. The downside was that in one of those 2 month phases, we were all facing the same nation-state attack. We were all doing our own research, reverse engineering the same samples, and turns out that there was a lot of duplication of effort that we could have saved ourselves if we started sharing early. And this is how MISP came to be in the first place. And this is something that we really stick by ever since. So the moment an incident reveals already some technical indicators that might be relevant, we share those out. And we might immediately get feedback from the community saying, oh, we've also seen that, and this turned out to be this or that other thing. So going back to it, that's one of the most crucial ones is don't wait too long with the sharing. It's also you also have to look at the data that you share in MISP as living documents. So that means that you will be refining the information, maybe even years down line when you get additional information. Perhaps you have new indicators that you use for retro hunting against your own logs, and you find that you actually missed something half a year ago, and then you include those in the report as well. So this is something that you constantly keep building on, and the information that you share with that and the community shares with you is getting better over time. Something else that is super important is labeling. So that's another huge tip that I can't stress enough. Keep in mind that whenever you're sharing information with a community, that community will have different needs. As I mentioned before, even in your own organization, depending on what your use case is, whether you have a CTI analyst that is monitoring certain threat actors all the way to basically just trying to feed a firewall, you're going to have completely different needs of what is relevant information, what is good enough data for that use case, and what is noise. And basically, because of this, make sure that whatever you share is labeled, that you include how much you trust the information, whether you consider this as a finished research or whether you're just getting started with it. Include anything that you know about what sort of techniques were leveraged during an attack, what sort of outcomes came from it, so that those that are receiving the data know how to immediately automate on it and use it. And it also gives a good idea to analysts sitting on the other side.
Because also the labeling will help you filter things and be able to correlate different events together. I do have a trick question there, maybe a little bit. Sorry, Andras, but when I hear you talk about what you would want to put inside an event, it sounds like you could take quite a bit of time doing this. So we all know that we're having issues with time and resources. And so how would you decide when it is worth the effort to make a proper, good, clean event and when it's okay to just share what you have, like your ongoing research, for example?
I mean, I would do both either way. So
Okay.
I would go that direction, but I would label it differently. So again, anything from raw indicators from the start to the final report, everything is worth sharing with the community. The only difference is really how you describe the information. What we generally do ourselves is we usually start with the quick and dirty solutions. So we let MISP automatically parse out data from ticket information, for example. And we start with that. So we start with a very raw event at first. We share that out, we mark it as raw, and then we get to work and start working on it and really enriching the information. Something that might be a good guidance on when you should really spend more time with it is, especially if you start encoding your event and you see that it doesn't have many correlations with existing data. So it's not something that was frequently reported or reported at all in your communities, then it's probably worth spending time on it because it might be something novel that the community hasn't seen before.
Thanks. That's actually quite a valuable insight, something to think about whenever we're working on MISP again. So some of you that are currently watching might be thinking, I'm actually interested in getting started with MISP. So how about we just take a little bit of time to break down how to do that. So the first thing that you need to do is set up the MISP server. Andras explained that in depth a little bit earlier today. The second element, if your organization has a Belgian company number, so we call the KBO or the BCE number, you can request to connect with the CCB's MISP to receive our own events. To give you an idea, we have already 334 organizations who are connected with us. I would really recommend it since it's free. We push information out daily so that you don't have to ingest it yourself. And our MISP events are available to everyone who's connected. In order to do this, it's a very simple process. All you need to do is send an email to info@ccb.belgium.be indicating that you want to connect on MISP. What we're going to do is that we're going to get back to you within a couple of days with some additional technical questions, ask you to perform a couple actions like creating a sync user to complete the setup. Everything is explained in the emails that you will receive after you initiated your request. If you're very curious as to the type of questions, they're really not complicated questions. You can find an example on the slide, just to give you an idea. Lastly, once you have replied back with the answers to the questions that we had, internally at the CCB, we will configure our server to pull and push from and to your own server. So in other words, you should be receiving our events and IOCs just a couple of days after. It's really as simple as that. I would recommend that you just go onto the website. We have a fresh new page, ccb.belgium.be/citrus/MISP, where everything is explained. I also see that we already have 13 questions on MISP, so I suggest that we can close the presentation part of this webinar now and move on to answering questions. Of course, if you have any more questions, just ask them in the Q&A section of the chat. Before we do start answering questions and to give Andras a bit of a breather, I have just one announcement to make. Of course, in 2026, we are committed more than ever to share information. And so I would recommend you to mark your agendas already for the next QCTR, our quarterly threat intelligence online event that will take place on the 22nd of April. We will, of course, continue with Cybertips. The next one is on the 26th of March, 2026. The topic is not yet defined because we are waiting for your suggestions. We have a couple of ideas, but we also want to hear what you would like to hear about. That's pretty much all I have to share. So let's get started on answering questions. Andras, you can take your first question.
Yeah, let's start maybe with this one. So there's a question: if MISP is free, what is the business model of the developers? If my organization starts using MISP, what organization will be identified as being our provider? So that's a good question. In our case, most of the core developers are basically working at CIRCL. We're basically paid by our ministry to do this. So in our case, it's pretty straightforward. The Luxembourg state has an interest basically to build security for the private sector. It's one of the benefits that it offers to companies moving there. So our work is funded mostly through that. Also, we have this mantra that if it's public money, then whatever we do should be public. So we basically make everything that we do at CIRCL open source. Something else to mention here is that we made sure that the license is so interlocked. Everyone that basically ever contributed to MISP is a copyright holder, that you would need to convince around 1,200 people worldwide in all sorts of organizations to ever change the license. So we don't want to end up being one of those projects that goes closed source and goes enterprise only after a while. So we're absolutely hardcore open source believers.
Nice. It's definitely a very interesting answer to a very interesting question. We have about 4 more minutes. So if you want to pick a second question.
Yeah, sure. For example, this one, any tips on how to identify and select sources feeds, which are the most relevant ones for your industry? This is a super difficult question, and obviously, I mean, we don't like giving guidance there because it's we don't want to play favorites with anyone out there. But one of the best things you can do is go to one of those clearinghouse organizations within your community. So CCB is perfect for that, for example. They're doing a lot of managing information also from other sources. So that means that they're basically curating the different information sources and giving you whatever is relevant. If you're looking at more industry-specific ones that are more sectorial, then usually you have ISACs or you have groups of organizations banding together and having curated feeds similar to that, or curated information to share. So we know of quite a few of these, for example, in the financial sector, in the telecom industries, and so on and so forth. So generally, these type of community feeds, I think, are the most relevant, mostly because they're about threats that target you. But besides that, one of the things that we like to do is ask for POCs from the various vendors. And you have a nifty tool in MISP that allows you to overlay the information from various feeds with each other, and allows you to see, for example, what the overlap between are, what we would need to cover a large set of information coming from more expensive feeds. Very often it's taking a lot of OSINT feeds. So yeah, it's a bit of research to figure out what the most relevant is, but there is some tooling built in that helps you do that.
Nice. I also think we have time for one little extra question, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, how do you differentiate between shared events in terms of information completeness or accuracy when you have lots of duplicate shared events? That's also a very good question, and also very difficult. I mean, first of all, whenever you're looking at information, whenever you're seeing overlapping events in MISP, you will see what percentage of it and how much of it correlates. If you see that every single indicator is correlating with another event, and that event has unique data points, that will probably be more complete. In terms of accuracy, things become more difficult. So obviously, everyone can make mistakes. Standards are different from organization to organization. So the best thing you can do is really build trust relationships to organizations, and also keep mental note of who the organizations are that you trust most. And if you see the same kind of threat reported from 2 organizations, then go to your most trusted source of information.
That's actually a really good way to think about it. That's why we're inviting experts to give us all these indications. That's really cool. Unfortunately, we are getting towards the end of today's webinar because we are just hit the 10:30 mark. A big thank you to Andras for being both clear and technical, which can be quite a feat in my opinion, and also for sharing his insights. I think that was truly valuable. So thank you so much for this. And thank you everyone for watching. I look forward to seeing you again on the 26th of March. Bye.
Bye.